we on the record? Good morning, Mark Scheifmeyer, the City Hearing Examiner. I've been asked to convene a public hearing in reference to an application by Tahoma Terra Holdings to amend the master plan community plan for Tahoma Terra. This comes to the hearing examiner not on a decision, but rather a recommendation to City Council. But the hearing nonetheless is like any other hearing before the hearing examiner. It's a public hearing intended to receive information from three sources, from city staff, from the applicant, and then from members of the public, so that I can make an informed recommendation to City Council based upon findings I receive from all sources. So this hearing, again, will have three pieces to it. We'll hear first from city staff, presumably from Mr. Cooper, perhaps from others. We'll then hear from the applicant to add to or subtract from anything the city has recommended and why it might deviate from anything the city proposes. And then once we've heard from those two parties, the hearing will be open for public testimony. For those of you who are members of the public wanting to be heard, we conduct the public testimony third so that you can hear the other pieces first and get a good understanding of what's being proposed so that your input is as informed as possible. This is not a large crowd, and so I'm not going to impose time limits on the presentation of any public testimony. If you do wish to testify, whether you are a member of the city staff or the applicant or a member of the public, you'll first be sworn, identify yourself, and then off you go. You will not be subject to cross-examination except by me, and I will not attempt to do that unless I'm trying to improve upon your testimony. That is, I'm a little unclear as to what you're pointing out, and I'm trying to clarify the point. So if I stop you, it's not to try to throw you off. It's just simply to try to better understand the points that you're trying to make. Please understand that this is a fact-finding hearing. That is a point that might seem pretty straightforward, but is lost on many public participants. What that means is I am gathering facts. I'm not gathering opinions. I'm not gathering public popularity. And so it is often that parties will come to me saying, well, I and my 6 neighbors oppose this project, and then sit down. Well, that hasn't helped me in any way. The fact that there is some opposition and it may be shared by others is a meaningless fact to me. But what is a meaningful fact is why. The why of that opinion or that position. For that reason, petitions, commonly worded statements, those kinds of things don't help me at all. And I offend a lot of people when I tell them I'm not really interested in their petitions. But the fact is that they're a form of evidence that is not legally relevant for my decision-making process. And so to suggest that I would give it consideration would be an improper suggestion. I want to be as transparent as to how I make decisions as I can so that the input I received is as focused on the true issues and not on something that really isn't gaining traction. Now, that's a little bit different for this hearing in a mild way, in that what I am doing is making a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council is a political body and is a bit more attuned, as it is required to be, to the way the wind is blowing. Something that doesn't interest me but may interest the City Council, and therefore, I guess to that extent, I may take note of project popularity or lack of popularity. Whereas if I'm making the decision myself, that's not interesting at all. So I may bend the rules of my normal rules a little bit as to, again, public opinion, but what I am mostly interested in is public fact. And so, again, we'll get underway. We'll begin with city staff. We'll go then to the applicant, and then we'll hear from the public. And we'll proceed in what I think is a fairly straightforward and probably prompt manner. So let's get started with Mr. Cooper. The record should reflect 2 more things. In advance of today's hearing, I've received a staff report authorized by Mr. Cooper together with various attachments. I have reviewed that in its entirety carefully. I have also reviewed the most recent decision, the 2020 decision, the last time this project came on for review by then Hearing Examiner Cassell on a recommendation to the City Council, and I've undertaken a site visit this morning. In fact, driven over that rocky road through the development area to get a better sense of the project site and its surroundings. So I am familiar with the site. One last observation, this is old hat for most of you in this room. This is a project that's been going on for nearly 20 years. It's new for me. As the relatively recently minted Hearing Examiner, I have not had any involvement in any of the prior hearings relative to this project. And so I am not a party of all that long history. So you can feel free to educate me a little bit more than you might otherwise, recognizing that I may not be as aware of some of its history as someone else may have been. And I won't take offense if you feel the need to educate me to some extent. I might even appreciate that fact. With those comments in mind, let's get underway. So Mr. Cooper, we'll have your testimony first. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. A couple of things. You did request that we do a sign-in sheet. Do we need to do that, or can people just give their names and addresses for the record?
Well, I'm just trying to be efficient with calling upon people in the public. I don't need that for the staff. I don't need it for the applicant. I just need it for potential members of the public, so I know who I should be looking to call once we reach the public testimony. So if you can just
put it forward, because it's going to be hard for them to.
Yeah, if you can find something, if you can just circulate that upon members of the public, just so I know who to call once we're there. And that'll work fine too.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Okay. So sure. Not going to testify, don't need to sign in, is that right?
That's right.
That's right, yeah.
I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either for sure. Maybe we just put our name on and just.
So while that's occurring, I did also want to alert you that I got 3 emails that are comments. So I need to submit those for you.
Yes. So we'll recognize the staff report and all of its attachments is Exhibit 1. And so why don't you provide me with those 3 emails? So the record will reflect that Mr. Cooper has provided me with 3 recent emails. The first is from Jesse Stahl, dated September 20. The second is from Amanda Kinner, dated September 20. And the third is Lawrence Supetta, dated September 16. I'll collectively identify these as Exhibit 2.
You have copies for.
Yeah. Not with me.
Yeah, and again, the city will want to add those to its website record as exhibits. So, okay. All right. So let's get underway, Mr. Cooper.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm like you. I've been with the city for 9 months, so this is an 18-year-old project, and I've spent the last several months really going back through all the records and the staff reports and documentation. I'm just going to summarize my staff report today, and then if there are any questions from obviously yourself or the audience, I'll be happy to try to go into more detail. But this project is an amendment to a previously approved master plan community. So it's not an entirely new project. It's an amendment to something that's been approved. It's on 13 and roughly 3/4 acres, and it's referred to as the Tahoma Terra commercial phase of the overall master plan community. So the things that are being proposed for this particular amendment are a 102-unit apartment complex, which will consist of 9 apartment buildings, 1 approximately 855 square foot commercial building with a drive-through, 1 approximately 1,690 square foot commercial building, and I notice I have a typo there. It says 169, it's 1,690. 2 restaurant retail buildings totaling about 7,000 square feet, and a 12-building self-storage facility with 769 storage units. Access to the apartment complex and commercial side is proposed at two different points, and they're both improved roads. There won't be any need for any upgrades. One would be off of Tahoma Boulevard, and the other would be off of the improved section of Berry Valley Road. There's a small section of Berry Valley that's been improved. Beyond that, it's definitely not improved, but the access would not be from that.
Is that city limit?
No, it's not the city limit. So sewer and water are obviously available. Stormwater drainage would be handled at the time of project development, and that would have to be done in accordance with the approved stormwater manual. So just some of the background. I've had questions about the master plan community in general in terms of how things get approved. And so I pasted in the entire code because the code for the master plan community is about 1 page long. It's very general. It's intended to be very flexible to encourage innovative design and to try to develop basically an overall concept for a community that includes a variety of residential uses, commercial, basically a self-contained community. One of the requirements of the master plan community is that it has to be at a minimum of 220 acres. And I'll just read the intent. It is the intent of this chapter to provide for large-scale projects that incorporate a full range of land uses where appropriate and consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's a minimum of 200 acres. And so something interesting about it is, and I've never seen this in other communities, Yelm Master Plan Community is both a zoning district. So like you might have a commercial zone, you might have a residential zone that's 4 units per acre or whatever. Master Plan Community is its own zoning district. And then it's also an overlay, which means there are no set standards within the Master Plan Community. There are no set setbacks, building sizes, nothing relating to maximum impervious surface. That is all basically developed and considered at the time of master plan approval. So for example, I've had some questions about the mini storage. We have two zones, the commercial 1 and commercial 2, which have a 500-foot setback for mini storage. The master plan community doesn't have any setbacks. So as part of reviewing and approving or at least recommending approval on our end, the mini storage, we looked at what could mitigate if you had a less than 500-foot setback, what would mitigate for that. And part of the design, which we've looked at, and it's part of the recommended conditions of approval, is the apartment complexes themselves are going to be constructed in a way that they're going to basically provide a visual buffer between Tahoma Boulevard and the proposed mini storage. So it won't really, I'm sure there'll be little pieces of it that'll be visible, but it's by and large won't be visible from Tahoma Boulevard. So as I mentioned, the master plan community has basically been built out except for this section. So of the 200 and some acres of the MPC, only 14 acres are left to be reviewed and approved. The only conditions that I could find from the initial council recommendation of approval in 2005 that don't appear to have been met, that I'm recommending be met for this particular approval are, and I'll just read them. 1, to mitigate previous impacts from agricultural activities to surface waters, plant communities, and animal communities along Thompson Creek Corridor and its associated wetland. The applicant, well, it says, has prepared a mitigation and enhancement plan to improve the surface water features. And I've not found any evidence that that plan has been prepared. So I'm recommending that as part of the project approval phase, that the applicant prepare the mitigation plan and do some basically mitigation in the buffer of Thompson Creek. The second one is one that's been kind of a stickler for the city and the Planning Commission and Council for a number of years, and that is prior to approval of any residential development west of Thompson Creek, the neighborhood commercial center shall be improved and ready for the construction of commercial buildings. Improved means that any applicable land use or land division approvals have been issued and all required site improvements for the land division have been completed. And so basically that was the council at the time saying that they want the commercial element to be completed. It still has not been completed. And I think the primary reason for that is basically been economic considerations. So as part of the approval recommendation for this phase, we are trying to establish a firm timeline for when the commercial has to be done prior to full build out. And I'll read the conditions when I get down to the end of the report. As you've already pointed out, Mr. Hearing Examiner, this is kind of a unique process. Normally, the hearings examiner would be the final decision authority, subject to appeal, of course. But in this case, you would be making a recommendation to the city council, and it would be the council who has the final decision. So there's another opportunity for folks, if you don't agree with the recommendation, you can also go to the city council.
I don't know that will be true. Most times when there's this two-tiered process, at least in the other communities in which I'm hearing examiner, this is the public hearing. And I would be a bit surprised if there's a second public hearing. There isn't one required. And most often city councils turn to the hearing examiner for this hearing so that they don't have to have one. So I don't know for a fact for Yelm, but I should just caution that I would caution against that promise because I don't know that that's true.
Okay. Well, I possibly stand corrected, so let me check on that. I assume that you could still write comment letters or do other forms of interaction. So the review criteria for amendment to the master plan community are not really spelled out in the code. So we have looked at what the actual criteria are for final master plan development approval. And under 1815-050, we believe that the criteria for approval for the final master plan, section C, would be the most appropriate. And it says a final master plan development may be approved when the city council finds that the final master plan is consistent with the conceptual master plan development and complies with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and the provisions of the unified development code. So in looking at this proposed amendment, I guess two of the primary things we're looking at is the proposal contrary to what was conceptually approved in 2005? And if it's not, does the proposed amendment actually fulfill the objectives of what was approved in 2005? Some of those, I guess, other areas that we look at to make that determination is, does it provide an equivalent amount and variety of uses, such as residence types and residences versus commercial uses? Does the proposed amendment result in the same level of potential impacts, including traffic and other environmental impacts? And we have found for residence types, the current proposal will develop 9 apartment buildings with 102 units. And although the original commercial concept did not have any apartments envisioned in the commercial zone, there were other amendments made to the master plan community in the past where apartments were supposed to have been located and single family residences were built. So adding these 102 units would actually make the overall master plan community basically whole, so to speak, because apartments that weren't previously built, that were envisioned to be built, would be built under this particular stage. As far as the residences versus commercial units, even though we are adding residential uses to the commercial area or the previously envisioned commercial area, it's not a conflict because the commercial element that was envisioned before is still going to be constructed. The traffic issues, traffic's a big concern for folks in Yelm, and almost any project that we do that's a subject that comes up. So we had the consultant hire a traffic engineer to review the previously approved traffic impact study and to see whether or not this particular project would add more trips. And in fact, the consultant found that it's going to add fewer trips than what the previous proposal was envisioning. And part of that was because they had different kinds of uses, like a gas station and other things that generate more traffic than what these proposed uses are going to generate. So I'm not a traffic engineer, so when I got that, I shipped it off to our third-party traffic engineer for peer review, and he looked at it briefly. He said I could do a full report, but I can tell right now that their results are accurate, and it's going to actually generate less trips than what the previous proposal was going to generate. On the environmental front, other than, obviously getting the mitigation that we want, the one new development since the 2005 approval is that the city of Yelm, like many areas in Thurston County, has habitat for the Mazama pocket gopher, and it has been listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. So any proposal that has soils that the gopher likes to live in is required to do a gopher screening to determine whether or not there are actually gophers there. And so we would, before any project development, require that. And basically the screening has to determine that there are no gophers. If they determine that there are gophers, then project development would have to be delayed until the city is able to complete an HCP that's underway. So that will do due diligence on that. So my recommended conditions of approval are 6. Number 1 is to ensure the commercial element of the master plan community is completed. The commercial structures proposed by the applicant must be completed no later than commencing construction on the 7th proposed apartment building. So in other words, the final 2 proposed apartment buildings would not be allowed until the commercial element has been completed. Mitigation plan to enhance the buffer of Thompson Creek and associated wetlands must be approved by the city and implemented by the applicant prior to construction. The proposed apartment buildings must be strategically placed to ensure a visual buffer between Tahoma Boulevard and the proposed mini storage facility, consistent with renderings previously provided by the applicant. 4, stormwater facilities must be designed to be consistent with the city's latest approved stormwater manual. The city does not commit at this point to using pervious surfaces as part of the stormwater system. That was mentioned in the project narrative as a possible approach to some of the stormwater management, but we just want to make clear that that's something we would have to review and approve at the time of application. A Mazama pocket gopher screening must be completed by a certified consultant, which meets the city's screening protocols prior to the authorization of any land disturbing activity. And then 6, unless expressly modified by this amendment, all previous conditions of approval for the Tahoma Terra Master Plan community remain in effect.
Thank you. A few questions, Mr. Cooper, in no particular order. And some are than others, perhaps. Since this is the master plan community concept in Yelm is, as you say, both zoning and overlay, do you feel that this proposed amendment must also be regarded as an amendment to zoning and therefore go through the zoning amendment process in GMA?
No, because the zoning itself is the criteria are generally laid out in the zoning, and the flexibility that's in those criteria are the zoning, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. Your proposed condition number 1 proposes that no commercial activity begin until, that commercial development take place no later than the 7th proposed apartment building. Why the 7th? What's magical about the 7th?
No particular, just because I know that there's a motivation to get the motivation throughout the whole development of the MPC has been to construct the residential units, and there's been a hesitancy to complete the commercial units, and so this is just to ensure that those get completed so that they because I know that the builder wants to build all 9 of them. and we want the commercial. So this is kind of a holding their feet to the fire condition.
And then my big one, I'm really having trouble with this mitigation issue. I am, as noted in my warning letter in advance, I am struggling as to how to address the mitigation plan that was proposed 18 years ago and has never been undertaken. And what partly bothers me, not only that it hasn't ever occurred, is that there were a lot of verbs and adjectives used in that requirement. It wasn't just mitigating. It was also enhancing. It wasn't just habitat remediation. It was recreational opportunities as well. So we have mitigation, enhancement, habitat, recreation, none of which have occurred. And I don't see a plan for any of that currently proposed, and I don't understand what staff would have in mind as approving when it has no directive for any of that. It doesn't have a manual to follow, similar to stormwater. It doesn't have particular guidelines within its code that I'm aware of for those standards. And what might be recreational purposes in the eyes of the beholder. So I don't know what staff would look to say this is an acceptable plan at some point after all this public hearing process has been completed. So I am really having some difficulty with that notion. And so I'm just curious as to what you might think of as an acceptable plan. What you envision coming to staff under your suggestion that this be something submitted to staff post council approval. What do you have in mind?
Okay. I will say, even though I have not seen a plan, there have been a few things done out there, and hopefully the applicant can testify to that. I know that they have buffer signs up, for example, which is kind of unusual if they haven't already gone out and done a few things. But typically, it's a pretty standard process for wetland mitigation, habitat mitigation. And we do it all the time, but it's always at the point of, say, land subdivision or construction, and it's just a prerequisite for getting a permit for the area in which this is located. So we do it at the permitting level, and it typically almost always involves having a certified wetland biologist go out. The site's already been delineated, so they don't have to do that, but go out and look at the site, see what would be the appropriate vegetation. They come up with a vegetation planning plan, list of plants, and it follows standard criteria and procedures. It's based on the Department of Ecology's wetland manual. There are really standard approaches to that. As far as the recreation component, in a wetland buffer, there really aren't very many recreation opportunities. You can have a walking trail, you can have something along the lines of passive recreation. So what we would be looking at actually is what's the minimum amount of impact that you could allow within the buffer and still call it recreation. We typically discourage any sort of active recreation in a wetland buffer. So it's something that we routinely do on a large percentage of the applications that we get before us.
Give me a second. You noted that there have been prior amendments which have altered the residential mix, and this, to some extent, returns the balance, and hence one of its justifications. In those earlier amendments, do you know the process that, was it the same standard applied, or do you have reason to know?
I will say to you that I would be surprised if the exact same process has been used every single time.
Okay. So I've stepped on your answer. I apologize. So there isn't a clearly established amendment process that you've uncovered over the years.
that I'm aware of, and it's not spelled out in the code.
Okay. That's my questions. Thank you. Turn then to the applicant. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper, did you have any other staff testimony that you wish to present? No. We will then turn to the applicant. And so will that be Mr. Carlson?
Yes, sir.
Chris Carlson, engineer for the project. And so, Mr. Carlson, let's first have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? And so you've heard Mr. Cooper's testimony. You're familiar with the staff report. You've heard my questioning, which gives you some sense of areas of interest. With all that in mind, from the applicant's perspective, what would you like to say?
Well, I think Gary did a nice job of giving an overview of the project. One of the things I'd like to start out with, he talked a little bit about what is currently approved under the master plan here, but I kind of want to be more specific about that. The western parcel, the larger parcel on the south side of Berry Valley Road, west side of Tahoma Boulevard, the previous master plan approval was for 4 12,000 square foot commercial buildings. The smaller piece, which is a little over an acre on the north side of Berry Valley Road, was approved for a gas station with 8 fueling positions, a convenience store, and a car wash. And as Gary alluded to, we were required to procure a traffic study. We hired Heath and Associates, which is an exhibit in the record, to make sure that this project wouldn't generate any new additional trips that weren't previously looked at. And so the results of that traffic study, as Gary alluded to, were reviewed by, I believe it's SCJ Alliance as their consulting engineer, third-party consulting engineer, which concurred with the report. And the findings of that report were that the amended project is going to generate over 1,000 less daily trips, vehicle trips, and I believe 107 less PM peak trips. So pretty substantial number of trips in terms of the traffic concerns that the city and the citizens of Yelm have regarding traffic impacts of the project. As far as the storage facilities, as Gary had indicated, there's a typical requirement in the C1 zone that the self-storage be more than 500 feet from, I believe it's arterial or collector roadway. We're a little bit less than that, but as he indicated, and the site plan indicates, we've oriented the multifamily portion of the project as a row along the east side of Tahoma Boulevard. There will be some peekaboo views that you'll be able to see the self-storage that's behind those on the west side of the property. But the multifamily is proposed at 3-story, and the self-storage is proposed at 1-story, although there are some architectural elements that are proposed for the self-storage facility to have a consistent and cohesive architectural feel for the project, and that would include the commercial aspects of the project as well. The small, what we're envisioning for the smaller building is a small coffee shop with drive-through.
So there'll be enhanced facades or heightened facades, is that what you're suggesting?
Right. So I think that's important. As far as your concern about, and the city's concern about the commercial and your question about Y7 and there is a huge demand for housing, as you know, throughout Western Washington, in all communities, and this multifamily piece will fill that gap. for Yelm in part, for Yelm. As Gary had indicated, this is a project, I'm kind of new to the project as well, but we're talking an 18-year-old project here. And as he indicated, multifamily, this project, when it was initially approved, was a more dense project. And that's purely, when he talked about portions of the site being diverted to single family through previous amendments, that was purely based on market demand for that particular type of product. Now, there's still market demand for single family, but there is also market demand, high market demand for multifamily housing in communities throughout the state of Washington. The commercial piece, the applicant has actually hired a couple of different professional real estate consulting firms to take a look at the viability of commercial uses in this portion of the city of Yelm. And they see it as kind of a real problem in terms of attracting tenants. And the main reasons are visibility, location of other commercial services along the city's main arterials just north of the project site, and then finally demographics. You need rooftops to support retail. So, we're fine with the condition, but we're still concerned a little bit of the viability of the retail and commercial portions of the site for those reasons. As far as the Thompson Creek mitigation, I was just talking to our client, by the way, sorry, Evan Mann with Tahoma Terra Holdings LLC is with me here this morning, and he might be able to provide a little bit more information on the mitigation, but he just whispered in my ear that he thought that the mitigation had been done. I don't know, there's a lot of records on this particular project over the last 18 years. And I know that there's a lot of them in the city system somewhere, but it's not real intuitive as to where to find those records.
I would only note in response that certainly was possible that it was commenced, but the master plan requires that it be updated and improved upon with every phase. So it's not mentioned in recent phases as having been improved upon. So while it's possible there may have been some initial work, I don't question Mr. Mann on that, but nothing in the record suggests that there were the updates as the plan required. So.
Okay. Well, we don't have really any substantive issues with the condition that Gary's talking about in terms of providing a mitigation plan for enhancement. I concur with Mr. Cooper's analysis of what typically is allowed in wetland buffers in terms of limited uses. Like he said, passive pervious recreation trails typically limited to from 4 to 6 feet in width, maybe some benches, possibly some exercise stations. Since we do have a creek here, a lot of critical areas ordinance do allow limited number of viewing points to be cut through to view the creek corridor. And like I said, we don't have any problem with putting a plan together. Enhancement would be obviously another part of that, as Gary indicates. There's criteria with the Department of Ecology, and typically in the local jurisdictions critical areas ordinance that sets forth what that looks like. We are a little bit concerned about the timing of the condition before construction activity commences, purely from a logistical standpoint. If we go out there and do the enhancement, for example, we go out there and plant a bunch of trees and plants and bushes, restore the corridor. it needs irrigation. And so, it's much easier to implement what I'm used to in my 30 years of planning is that those types of plans are typically conditioned upon the issuance of a CO or a final plat approval, some other point in the process. At the end of the project, when you're asking for a CO, you're going to have your landscape contractors out there that are going to be doing the irrigation and planting not only the plants and trees within the project area, the parking islands and setbacks and buffers, but also any kind of mitigation in a critical area buffer. I know you've had a chance to review Exhibit H, which is our project narrative. I feel we did a thorough job in touching on all the criteria that we need to for your consideration for recommendation to the City Council for approval. And so if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I don't think that I do. Thanks. And Mr. Carlson, would that conclude the applicant's presentation?
Yeah, Mr. Mann indicated he's.
Okay. All right.
Possible to chime in on one of Chris's remarks?
Yes, the city was certainly going to get, and the applicant, an opportunity to have a comprehensive response. If you feel it would be more timely at this moment, I don't have a problem with that, rather than hold it to later. But I should have reminded both staff and the applicant that they will have a chance to respond to all public comment. But if you'd like to respond to the applicant.
I think it'd be timely. Chris's remarks regarding the mitigation plan, et cetera. One thing that is also routinely done, because this happens quite a bit as well, when you're looking at doing things that involve planting plants, there are certain times of the year that are preferred to do that. And those windows can sometimes get in the way of the development of a project. And so what we typically do in a situation like that is we could still do the plan. We could approve the planting plan, come up with an estimate of what the cost of doing that would be, and then have the applicant either provide a letter of credit or a bond to the city in the amount of what it would cost to do that plan. And then we would allow them to go proceed with their project with the understanding that as soon as the best growing season arrives, they would do the planting, but we would have the guarantee that if they didn't, for some reason or another, we could pull the bond, we could pay to have it done ourselves. So basically what we ask for is kind of a rock solid guarantee that that project is going to happen one way or the other. So in that, that's one situation or circumstance where we would be comfortable with allowing them to go ahead and proceed with certain elements of the project.
So let's turn then to the public hearing phase. And do we have the sheet? Thank you. And by the way, just because you signed this, it means you're bound. You won't be arrested if you choose not to testify, or if you didn't originally sign and now do, that's fine as well. What we want to be sure is simply that we get all the desired public testimony, and that no one feels that they've been infringed, their right to do so has been infringed in any way. So with that in mind, the record should reflect that there are 5 members of the public who have signed the sign-up sheet, and I left my reading glasses, so I may or may not be able to read all these. I think I can. The first is Patricia Butler. Patrice. Well, I'm sorry. And Ms. Butler, do you wish to testify?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll have you come to the podium. And I apologize for stating your name. Ms. Butler, do you swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Go ahead.
On the notice of hearing, I have one question. The sentence that says, access to these sites is proposed to be provided by Tahoma Boulevard and Berry Valley Road. So my question is there a plan to either put a light there or a roundabout?
You mean at the intersection of Tahoma and Berryfield?
Yes.
Okay. I should have, I always think of things I should have said at the beginning, one of which is how to address questions. And actually, while we are turning more and more to remote hearings for these types of things, the one really good thing about an in-person hearing is that we have a better format for that. In a remote hearing, what I do is I collect all those questions, make sure I remember them all, and then we attend to them once the public testimony is done. But in an in-person hearing, I don't have any reason why we have to hold that off. And I've got everybody who might answer the question or any question present. So when any of you have a question to me, I'll decide how to redirect it. I'll serve as the traffic cop. I'll take the question, but then decide who might best answer it. So a long way of saying, Mr. Cooper, in response to Ms. Butler's question, do you envision any additional traffic lights along Tahoma Boulevard?
Well, if you don't mind, I would rather have our public services director field that question.
All right, so let me just catch my notes up. And so, Mr. Colt,
Yes.
Your position is again Public Works Director?
Public services director.
Services, excuse me.
It's like a public works director, but funnier.
Thank you. And let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You've heard Ms. Butler's question. How might you respond?
So there are no planned improvements at that intersection currently. Their traffic study did not indicate a need for anything there. As more development happens on Berry Valley, there could be the case where something would be installed there, but we won't know until those developments come in. Answer? Hope that answered your question.
I'm sorry, Ms. Butler, that concludes your comments and questions?
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Anthony Joyce. Good morning, Mr. Joyce. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Go ahead.
My first question, and maybe sounds like this was already answered, is that those apartment buildings, I've heard in the city of Yelm that in the past it's been 3-story high limit, that maybe that has been increased to 6, and that these apartment buildings sounds like they would be 3 stories high. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can I refine your question?
Yes.
Are they assured to be a maximum of 3-story under as proposed?
Yeah, under what we've approved.
I was concerned when they said that the master plan community would have its own code and that they could change it and decide, oh, no. Sounds like, okay. The other question I have is so it says 9 apartment buildings, 102 units. Is that each apartment building? Well,
That's a total.
total. Yes. Okay. All right. And then there's a wedge of land between Thompson Creek and Jensen Drive. Is there any plan for developing that area?
Sure, we'll answer that. Yeah. That's part, so no, there's no plans to develop that area.
Is that considered a wetland and so?
It is part of the wetland buffer, correct? Not all of it.
Give me. According to myself, I prep by looking at where I think issues are, and then someone tosses at a street that I wasn't ready for. So Jensen, where is it?
I could point it out if you'd like.
Please.
The master plan part.
Is it on the master plan?
Oh, right here.
Oh,
This
oh,
wedge
yes.
of
Okay.
land.
Yes. Yes.
Mostly it's because I live right here, so
Okay.
curious as what would be in my.
So
backyard.
Jensen being the developed portion on the west side of Thompson Creek. Okay. And I did drive down Jensen this morning, so I'm familiar with your neighborhood. And so the question was, between Thompson and Jensen and the area currently undeveloped, will any of that be proposed for the development? And the answer was no. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colt,
Yes.
what is that piece? It's not the Thompson Creek piece as shown on the plat. What was its purpose? Do you recall?
So I don't know what the purpose is. Maybe the developer can answer. I know right now it's just an open space that people walk their dogs or play in,
I
but
think it's bluff too, isn't it? That's a elevation change.
yes, it does drop off quite a bit from the development currently there to that.
And maybe it's just a steep slope that's protected in that regard?
That could be correct.
One other thing, there are times of the year where that's all underwater, so that might be part of the reason.
Oh,
too.
okay, thank you. Yeah, so I suppose it could have also qualified as a critical area, a flood plain, or a number of other things. So, okay. Wayne Robinson.
It's me. And I don't have any questions. I
Okay.
find myself in the wrong meeting.
I sometimes feel that way as well. I think I have dreams about that.
I was waiting for the Longmire. Is that gonna,
Oh, yes, that has been postponed.
okay, can I,
Oh, I probably should have alerted. I didn't even think about doing so. That was postponed due to some procedural issues with the city. I was notified. I didn't have anything to do with that, but I should have given notice that the Habitat for Humanity project, which was co-scheduled for this morning, has been continued to a later date. I don't know the later date. Do you, Mr. Cooper?
October 9th at 1 p.m.
October 9th,
Yes.
Okay.
same place?
Yes.
I could have saved you an hour.
Trying to get in touch with people.
Yeah, I got the one, and so I'm sorry for,
No, I am sorry for not thinking of alerting people to that fact. That's my bad.
thank you.
I'm going to do this one wrong. Voorhees, Mr.
Orchers?
Okay. Sorry, Orchard, thank you. And is it Brandon?
Yes. A couple things and a couple questions.
Sure, let me just get us situated. So it's B-R-A-N-D-O-N
Yes, sir.
and B-O-R-C-H-A-R-D?
CHERS.
E-R-S, oh, sorry. Okay, let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
So if some of my facts are misconstrued, please correct me. I've only lived in Yelm for about a year, so I'm not fully up to date on everything that has transpired up at Tahoma Terra. But I did have a couple clarifying questions. I also had some statements. So the innovative design piece that Mr. Cooper alluded to, or I believe it was you, Mr. Schreiber. How is that being conceptualized up there? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's not a very innovative development as far as developments are concerned. They're simply single-family houses laid out in plat.
I don't think I used the term, but the city may have. So we'll stop and ask the question. And Mr. Cooper, and I don't remember you using it, maybe you did.
I have.
But if to the extent that it might have been used, in what context might it have been used?
Okay, well, so it's typically in a zoning district, let's say, because we have a variety of residential zones. We have like R4, for example, which is 4 units per acre. Everything in that zone has to be, uniform. Same sort of density, generally the same housing type. So I guess when I use innovative, I guess we could perhaps use a different, varietal, let's say that. So in other words, this particular zoning district, the master plan community, it's a minimum of 200 acres, and it requires basically, it's kind of supposed to be considered somewhat of a self-contained community. And by that, I'm not saying it's fully self-contained, but it will have apartments, it will have townhomes, it will have single-family residences, it will have commercial. So most zoning districts don't allow for that kind of thing. Commercial's commercial, residential's residential. So the master plan community allows for all those kinds of things, and it's intended to provide all those kinds of residential use types, or residential types and commercial uses.
Okay. Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up about the self-contained community and the variety of uses. So there's nothing up in Tomatera right now, and you spoke on it, that you were concerned about commercial development being delayed and postponed for 18 years now. There's been no demonstration of good faith up there presented that there's anything but residential being developed up there. The commercial uses, the urgent care that's now not being proposed to not being built, none of that has transpired there. So how does this, in essence, create a self-contained community as it was originally envisioned?
Well, I'm not familiar with urgent care having been proposed for the
In
master.
2005, it was proposed to be an urgent care facility. It was zoned for that.
Well, I honestly don't know. That's history I don't know about. So I'll just let you know.
It was in the,
But-
I believe I emailed with you, it was sent back to the original, it was originally a medical facility and,
Okay. Yeah.
urgent care was kind of that perimeter.
Yeah, I cannot answer that question because, I wasn't here for any of those amendments. I've been here 9 months. I've been here less than you have. So I don't know what the reasoning was behind that. Typically, there have been a variety of decisions that have been made based on current economic conditions at the time. So like we had a recession in 2008. I'm sure some things changed in terms of construction. I know that I've gotten comments about needing an urgent care facility, but it's never been presented to me as an option in terms of the applications we've received. So I can't really answer that.
Well, probably hasn't been an issue. It probably hasn't been presented because it's not what the developer's intention is. So, and it should be put on the radar and noted that if they want to have good faith in those commercial developments and being a self-contained community, that this is something that they should be putting forth the effort rather than a 769 storage facility, which this community definitely does not need. Because at this moment, right? So that we don't have the population to support it. And we'll get into that here, and I have a couple other comments on this a little later. So essentially, this is kind of a free-for-all, is what I'm speaking for the community, because I'm not the only one that thinks this master plan is a free-for-all. They can just kind of pick and choose what they want to build, when they want to build it. They're not being held accountable. That's really what it is sounding like. Especially with this arbitrary 7 apartment buildings, and your justification, or the developer's justification, was the need for housing. Well, we've had multiple apartment buildings and complexes developed in Yelm, especially in the last 18 years, that, as a property owner myself, we have residential rentals, and they are, priced very fairly. And this is we don't have an issue filling them, but I'm not saying that we don't have people beating down our doors. So speaking from experience, that's the reason I bring this up, is we don't find that there is a need to the greatest extent of having to develop 7 additional buildings expeditiously. Not 7, and then to do the commercial. Rather, it is, we feel there should be an infrastructure built to support the people that those buildings are bringing in, which Yelm, has been doing over the years, but has not been able to fulfill. To include things like emergency services, expansion of the fire department, expansion of schools. So these are all multiple things that need to be considered prior to bringing in additional families.
Okay, well, those are all great comments. Cody might have some historical background as far as the schools and fire and all that go. One thing I will say as far as the growth is concerned, so Yelma's gone in the last 20 years from under 3,000 to 11,000. And the Thurston Regional Planning Council estimates that by 2045, we will have 24,000. And we're not building fast enough to keep up with our population growth. So there is demand. And the apartments that have just recently been built and gotten certificate of occupancy are almost already full. So that piece of it, you know, I would, I guess, disagree with your comment about demand. The other things I think are all great comments. I mean, as a community, of course, we need things like urgent care but we also need, on the other end of it, the folks who think they can make it work. You know, there's an economic aspect to this. Like the city cannot require people to build. You know, we can't say you have to build a Popeyes over there or something like that. But,
I understand,
but I understand too what you're saying. Sorry.
I always
We're getting
about losing
discussion.
again, because what I want to do is encourage a healthy dialogue. On the other hand, I want it to be a dialogue addressed to me. And so I've been patient about all this, and I don't mind it at all. I just don't want it to go on into where I have lost my meeting. So
Understood.
that's nobody's fault, and I'm not being cranky about that. Because actually it was quite useful. But let's work back to where I'm engaged in the conversation and maybe directing the questions a little bit more.
Getting back to what I was talking about keeping, good faith and fulfilling their plan. So out of the 220 acres, we now have many homes, many living arrangements that have been developed up there to Almatera. And we only have 14 acres left. These were the numbers you stated, Mr. Cooper. And those commercial, so they've had, just under 200 acres that have been developed at how they would like. And they have not had the good faith to do any of the commercial development that has been initially asked and proposed. And so even building the apartment buildings to start, they should be held accountable to, I think they've had enough grace period. They should be developing the commercial areas first and then the apartment buildings and then anything else after that. And this is just my thoughts on this. I did have I just wanted to get a clarification on the 1815050 criteria is met when consistent with comprehensive plan and conceptualized. So could you, and if it's all right, could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't have the comp plan with me, but our comprehensive plan has several elements in it, and that there's a housing element, and they're just general priorities and objectives that go into a comprehensive plan. And one of them is obviously providing adequate housing stock, a variety of housing uses. I could have probably, and I'd be happy actually if you want to give me your email address, I can send you that information. But it's basically a set of goals and objectives for providing housing. Right. So this fulfills some criteria within that housing element. And then the conceptual piece is there's kind of a two phases to the master plan community. One is you just approve the overall concept, and then you finalize it. And so this would be kind of the amendment. It's already been finalized, but we're amending a final plan. But is it consistent with what was originally conceived?
Yes.
And so that's...
And going on that part, so we were talking about verbs. Mr. How do you say your name? Scheidmeier.
Mr. Hearing Examiner will.
So you talked about some verbs and you had a big issue with mitigation. And I think we've heard a lot about the mitigation. Okay, we haven't heard a lot about the habitat, the recreation, and the enhancement, because as far as have understood it from you, Mr. Hearing Examiner, was the entire 200-acre community is supposed to have all these things. And now we're only focusing on the remaining 14-acre piece so we don't have the habitat, we don't have the recreation, we don't have the enhancement of the area. So I mean, we're talking,
That's
and that's a clarifying item.
paraphrasing what I said slightly.
Yes.
I'm referring to Thompson Creek.
Okay, that was a clarifying question. Okay, so specifically Thompson Creek. You know, in other communities I've lived in, here it's just an observation. Other communities I've lived in, there's been extensive wetlands, extensive, critical areas, and they've did the best to establish trails, boardwalks, sitting areas, viewing areas, areas where people could, walk their pets and recreate. And, we're not talking about football fields, and, baseball fields, but areas that are allow people to enjoy that natural area, which I feel is pretty important. So I think when we say we're limited, I think it just needs to be a little bit more creative, in how we establish those recreational areas. So let me see. Let me just double check. Question for Mr. Carlson. What reports did you guys have that what market reports have you guys pulled, or do you have that speak to the demand of housing in the area?
Well, I don't specifically recall who provided them. I believe it was Kidder Matthews was one of them. Anyway, Barry can speak to that one. Yeah, it's our turn. So maybe we can get Evan.
Sure. And I understand that we don't need microphones in this room, so I don't have to have you come to the podium as well. But if I could see Mr. Mann, it's always nice to see who I'm hearing from. So, Mr. Mann, we'll have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing?
Yes.
Mr. Birchers has posed the question as to on what information the applicant is making this request. How would you respond?
Well, I guess there's a whole bunch of responses that, as the applicant, we'd like to make. Typically, we wait till public comment is complete and then we address.
We'll go back. We'll come back. Okay. And Mr. Colt had expressed a desire to respond to something. We'll come back. So we'll just come back at the conclusion of all public testimony. Otherwise, we're going to break this up quite a bit, and so we'll be a little bit more efficient about that. So,
and I just had, I guess I think Mr. Mann will probably address it. How did they think or believe that mitigation was completed? Because, the city doesn't have a record of mitigation, an extensive record of mitigation. As you yourself had stated, there was some things that were in there, but as far as the entire project is concerned, there was lacking some paperwork. So maybe Mr. Mann could just speak on those items as well.
all right.
And that's all I have.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
And again, note of your questions, or the parties have noted them, and so I'll ask them to respond collectively once we're through all our witnesses.
Thank you.
The last is Wendy, is a Carpenter?
Carpenter,
Good morning. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead.
One question I had, we're discussing the 200 acres, the last 14. However, I do know Tahoma Terra, correct me if I'm wrong, as a master plan community is actually much, much larger than that and eventually is to connect over to George Road, correct?
think you're talking about a separate area that was envisioned that never was built. It was called Thurston Highlands,
Okay.
and it was during the 2008,
Right.
recession that was abandoned. So there are, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's about 220 acres in private ownership, and the city owns now 640 acres there. And we don't currently have any plans for it. That doesn't mean something won't happen at some point.
So let's just say that was to be, I assume it'd be sold at some point. I assume the city's not planning to keep it forever. I would think that's going to be another master plan community.
It would have to be.
Right. So we're talking about more of the same and potentially thousands more houses going in that area. And I was told, having a good authority, that actually part of the original conception of this master plan community was that a fire station was to be built in there as part of the self-contained community. That was a stipulation of the original builder. Well, the original builder lost it in the 2008, whatever, and that immediately dropped that requirement. There was no longer a fire station needing to be built in there. There was no longer the actual community resources because it changed hands. They lost it, yada, yada. To me, I work a job that is directly impacted by this kind of community, master plan community, and there is such a need for actual community resources. Schools, fire stations, police, urgent care. And I've lived it for 13 years, and it only gets worse every day in terms of needs for people. The 2005 original concept for the medical facility, Yelm Family Medicine is arguably really the only place in town to go for medical care, and they're overrun. You can't get in there, the doctors are overburdened, and people have to travel from a community this size, 40 minutes to a hospital. Literally, people die in that time. I mean, that is life and death right there. I mean, even if you have to go get stitches on your finger, you shouldn't have to go 40 minutes to a hospital. So it kind of angers me that something that was actually zoned to be a community resource is now being used in a way to really line pockets. I am a real estate investor myself, but I think in terms of what the community needs, this is a resource that should actually be held to the builder needing to build it, to build the medical facility, to build the things people need. What's really upsetting is I know that all the other zonings in the city are held to these standards. The city will fight you tooth and nail. For example, I own a commercial property. When I bought it, there was literally meth being dealed out of it. Police knew it, everything. I fixed it up, put several $100,000 into it, and there was a really rundown chain link fence around it. I asked the city, I know you don't allow a chain link fence inside the public. It's already here. Can I please make a new fence? Like, just make it look better. I was told no. I was not allowed to do that. And it still stays there. It looks like really bad word I'm not going to say in public. And then this happens, and I come here and said there's basically no control over anything the builder does in this area. Like you even said, you're surprised it's such a small amount of control. There's no setbacks. There's no control by the city over what happens here. Yet everywhere else besides a master plan community, they will fight you to the death about every little thing, even to help improve the way it looks to the city. So it's upsetting to me that it's just told, go do whatever you want, doesn't matter. The monstrosity was built over here 3 stories, I've been told by many business owners, blocks their entire view of the mountain. I know people that live on Berry Valley Road. It's a really nice area right now. It's kind of, there's build up, but then there's a nice kind of field area. That's gonna be gone. I mean, that is going to be all be ruined. The way that Yelm looks is no longer the way that I think it was even intended to be by the original master plan community builder. And I think the people on Berry Valley Road are going to be upset by the way that it looks when it's done. I was just messaging with a friend who sold a house of it. I said, you're really lucky you got out because it's not going to look the same anymore. But I know there's a lot of emotion in my comments, but that's because it feels like the people of Yelm really do have such little voice and say over what's happening, especially over in that area, when it is so impactful to the people who do live here. Like I said, it should be more than a page. And when I emailed you a couple weeks ago asking about setbacks and things, and you send it back and I read the actual zoning online, it said basically they can do whatever they want. There is nothing that says anything about what can be done, where it can be done, how it can be done. They basically have free reign. And I think that that's wrong. And I think that even though it is a master plan community, self-contained, there should be some governance over that as it is with every other zoning in the city. What's that?
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public? I don't see anyone that isn't already spoken, but if there are any other members, just so that I am complete, the record will reflect that all those who have wished to be heard have. Now let's get back to a couple of comments or questions that the parties have caused me to have, and then we'll come back to what both the city and the applicant might like to respond to. It may have been Mr. Borcher's, perhaps Ms. Carpenter's comments that have triggered a couple questions regarding concurrency. So your report speaks to traffic concurrency and confirms that there is concurrency, but both mention schools and fire, and I am curious about concurrency with each. Mr. Cooper, Mr. Colt, how might you address concurrency issues?
So schools and fire, whenever a development comes in and has a dwelling unit built, they have to pay an impact fee. That impact fee directly goes to those. So school and fire both have impact fees. The school is supposedly supposed to use those impact fees to build new facilities for that new population. So roughly, they've gotten over the last 2 years about $3 million in impact fees from development in town. I don't know how much it costs to build a new school, but that's a pretty nice chunk of change to do something. Fire impact fees are very similar. So what they do with that money, we can't control. That's on them, but it's supposed to be designed to help serve the population that came in.
Okay. And so, Mr. Cooper, as to your report then, do you feel that concurrency requirements have been satisfied?
Well, the concurrency requirements that were established in the beginning, there were fees that had to be paid. And again, Cody's going to know more about this than I have, but they complied with the fees that were required at the time of approval. That's about as much as I can tell you.
Okay. I think that's an answer. I'm not sure it's a full answer. To the extent that there is an amendment, and it's seeking to adjust those earlier required numbers and hence fees as a result of those earlier numbers, I want to be assured that I can tell the council that it has been reported that there is concurrency. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but in Yelm, concurrency as to fire and schools is achieved by impact fees. And it doesn't require additional evidence, but it is the imposition of those fees that is conclusive evidence of concurrency. Am I correct in understanding that?
That's my understanding, Cody.
That's correct. And there is also a separate impact fee that was applied to Tomatera, which was a police impact fee, which we do not have in any other area or zone. So they've also had to pay a police impact fee for every house built.
So, and that would be applicable to additional housing imposed?
Correct.
No parks or other impact fees. Instead, the project has required its own parks. Is that correct?
Correct. And the parks they installed were larger in scale than what a normal requirement would be. And they are open to the community versus just open to the residents in the houses up there.
And taking into consideration additional housing units, would they still be deemed at least as large, if not larger, than what would have been required under the city standards?
Sure, I understand that question.
Mr. Colt explained that the park were established were larger than what were required. That suggests that there's a measurement device for what is larger than, or for what was required, therefore that this was larger than that standard. If that's standard based upon housing units, maybe square footage per housing units or number of pieces or whatever per housing unit, if we now increase the housing units, are those parks still adequate for that number of units?
Well, it's a little kind of an apples and oranges thing because like most projects, well, almost every project that we do does not require a park to be built. So a land subdivision will have a small percentage dedicated to an open space area. You know, you might have a basketball hoop or something, but we don't require parks. The master plan community is the only community that has required parks. And this particular,
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. But let me refine my question. To the extent that the original master plan established a park requirement on a mathematical formula, are we still complying with that mathematical formula?
yes, we're still building to the same density. It's
Parks, are we still complying with any mathematical formula that's found in the original master plan as to the scope of park?
Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to refer to. So we're building to the same density. They're adding a recreational component which complies to the overall parks requirement. So yes.
Okay, all right.
I thought maybe you were asking, are we building more apartments in Envision and do we need another park? And then to that, I would say no.
Okay.
I might be able to answer it. I think so they are adding recreational areas to this specific development. There'll be a basketball hoop proposed and other things that will add to that recreational opportunity.
Structures as well.
Yes.
It's not evident from the materials. I didn't pick that up. Okay.
On the site plan, in between the apartments and the,
That's way too tiny for me to see. I guess now I see some things that didn't have, I should have looked much closer, and now I understand what those are. Okay, so there are enhanced park provisions as part of this. All right.
yes. Sorry it took so long to get there. I was trying to understand your question and you.
And sometimes in confusing each other, the net result is a much better answer, and I got that answer, so, okay. Those are my additional questions. Mr. Colt had raised his hand during Mr. Bircher's testimony, wishing to speak to certain issues. So maybe I'll just have staff confer if they have collectively a set of things they want to say, or just Mr. Colt's things. You want to just, do you need a moment to confer as to,
I only have one thing, but I'll let Cody go first.
So I'll just try to go through and address some of the comments that were made. The first one was about Thompson Creek. So there is a trail about 1.5 miles that was built along Thompson Creek that follows the creek the entirety around the apartment complex they built on the lower level. And it's an open trail that follows the creek along with a buffer area. I should have chimed in when Mr. Cooper was talking about the Thompson Creek improvements. So there have been some improvements done. Again, we don't have written evidence of those, but they are there. You can walk that trail currently. So that's recreational opportunities along the Thompson Creek. About the...
and you think that was responsive to this project?
It was responsive to the original first phase. I'm sure when...
Right, to this master plan community.
Correct.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, so to the extent that Mr. Carlson may have expressed the belief through Mr. Mann that there had been improvements made, your information is consistent with that.
Correct. Yeah, I've been on the trail myself, so.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And then there's a question about apartments or needing for residential. We, and Mr. Cooper mentioned it, we had permitted multiple apartments in the last 2 years. We had a call from one of the apartments last week that opened in January. They are at capacity and looking to build new apartments because they need more space. And that's happened a couple of times over the last couple of months, but specifically, I had an apartment call us in the last week about that. That just opened.
Okay. Your first comment inspired one more, or reminded me one more. Is there much, if any, institutional memory within the totality of city staff with respect to the start of this project? Are there key staff members who are still present who were here in 2005?
Negative.
So no institutional, significant institutional memory. We do have, I mean, the person who was here works in Lacey, and I have failed, I've talked to him when I have questions, but no.
Okay, it's not critical, I'm just curious. Okay. Mr. Cooper, you had asked to speak as well.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that I understand just clarify, that the mitigation and recreation piece applied just to Thompson Creek, which is that buffer is a relatively small part of the overall Tahoma Terra community. And that, there are sort of competing objectives when you want to add recreational components to a buffer area of a natural resource. So, the Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, both have regulations for the protection of those. That's how we establish buffers to begin with. They basically come out of state law. And the reason for the buffer is to preserve and maintain the habitat surrounding we call them critical areas, whether it's a wetland or a stream. The buffer is there to preserve and protect the critical area. And sometimes that means having native vegetation to prevent, any kind of runoff from getting into the stream, all those kinds of things. So that's why we call for a minimum amount of recreational opportunities within a buffer.
Well, yes, and I recognize that. In that we who enjoy recreation, especially recreation in the woods or in riparian areas, must also recognize that we have to be very careful in that enjoyment. I had a huge project at the DeGrasse Lakes Preserve in Olympia where a wonderfully preserved natural area is also to somehow be enjoyed recreationally, and good luck figuring out where the intersection point of those two goals is. And so, I'm hypersensitive to the fact that in protecting the area, while also encouraging its use, that there has to be some sort of intersection. So, got it. I understand. Okay, having heard from staff, we'll turn to the applicant. Mr. Carlson or Mr. Mann, you had earlier expressed the wish to have a couple of responses. So is it Mr. Mann?
Yeah, I'll jump up this time and Chris will mop up after. So Evan Mann with Salemville Homes and Tahoma Terra LLC. So we've heard a lot of talk about the mitigation and what's been done and what hasn't been done. Just like you've heard, there's a lot that's been done that we can't find records for at the city. I know, when the bridge was built over Tahoma Terra, or for Tahoma Boulevard, there was significant mitigation done up and down that corridor of Thompson Creek. So there, again, just the fact that there are your placards saying, here's the buffer, nothing beyond this, there are mitigation things that have been done progressively with each phase. And that being said, without a strong record saying that this portion of Thompson Creek directly to the east of this commercial piece that we're kind of making this change for, we're acceptable. We find it acceptable to do that mitigation for that portion. So we're not trying to skirt out of that in any way, shape, or form. Again, lacking any hard evidence that this area has been officially mitigated, enhanced, we're willing to do that. So that condition we're comfortable with. To clarify a comment about, I guess it was kind of insinuated that our group doesn't want to do the commercial. We have worked on this proposal now for 4+ years at the cost of several $100,000 in all kinds of consultant fees and efforts with at least, I think, two planners before Gary, planning directors before Gary. And so this is not something that's just come easy and that we've been given a pass by the city on. Certainly had long conversations with many council members, planning commission members, and have had some opportunities to revise and refine this proposal. To be clear, the neighborhood commercial zone, which is what is in the master plan community, but is based on, now we look to the C1 zone, allows for a 60-40 split of commercial and residential. We're not doing anything other than that. So we're basically meeting the standard that exists. What was proposed previously in the master plan was the C1 or the neighborhood commercial zone. What may have been conceptualized in urgent care, is irrelevant. That's the zone, and whatever can happen in that zone can happen now or then. So again, just as if this was any other neighborhood commercial zone in the city, the proposal needs to meet that that zone. And so that's what our intent has been. And obviously we're looking for some accommodation for the storage, being that there's a 500-foot setback required along the boulevard. But to be clear, there is actual significant demand for the storage. So one of the comments that we've heard today is that there's a lot of homes that have gone in, and there's a lot of homes that are smaller. There's a variety. We've got townhomes, apartments, small lot homes, alley load homes, and we have some larger lots. But even on the larger lots, there's not enough room for someone to park an RV or a boat, or even to really store any of their whatever they may be. So we've found that this portion of the city actually is significantly lacking in the area of storage, and these homes that we're developing and that not related to us, but in the future to further to the east, will develop. There's significant demand for storage, and also to be clear, storage is a commercial use, and is only allowed in the commercial zones in the city. Let's see. Yeah, so again, just it is the innovative design. It really does include a variety of uses. We did have, as we worked through this, like I said, we spent a lot of money with consultants and trying to figure out, is there a demand for commercial? Should we just build commercial? We farmed it out for probably 2 years trying to sell it, to see if somebody would come by and buy it to build some commercial. There was zero demand for this commercial in fact, even what we're proposing is a risk for us at this point. So the commercial we're proposing includes a small office building, includes 2 retail buildings that could potentially hold restaurants or retail offices or retail spaces. It also includes a coffee shop. So coffee shop, we feel like there's could be enough demand to keep running. The office space will probably be a soft market, but when we find a good tenant, that will likely be successful. The retail and restaurant spaces we're concerned about, but again, we've worked on this proposal for years. We're committed to it. We're not trying to put one in front of the other at this point, as much as we're just trying to get it all built, get it all leased out, and hopefully viable at that point. So again, market reports, we had some done by Keller Williams and I believe Kidder Matthews. Let's see. Yeah, and then with regard to concurrency, so the main element being the question was parks, right? So as it relates to parks, we're providing over 20,000 square feet of new park space in this commercial space. So between the apartments and the commercial or storage space, there's a significant park area that kind of stretches between them. So that adds further to that buffering from Tahoma Boulevard that we're providing. So essentially, we've got landscape, we've got the 3-story apartments, we've got a large park space, we've got more landscape than the storage, and we've also oriented all of the storage doors away from the boulevard. So there's no danger. And one of the concerns we got from council was that really don't like the idea of driving down a commercial strip and seeing garage doors staring at us. And so that was one of the reasons that we oriented garage, any roll-up doors or doors for the storage are anticipated to be faced away from Tahoma Boulevard towards the back of the site to avoid any visual impacts that may be of concern. So those are my clarifications. I think Gary's done a great job trying to piece together a lot of history and done a great job working with us to refine again the proposal to a point that I think the city would be benefited by. We would be happy to proceed on the project.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. That will conclude then the public hearing, having heard public and also having provided both the city and, thought I heard something.
Anthony Joyce.
Mr. Joyce, what is it that you would like to say?
Is there a rendering that would show us what this would look like, what it's proposed to look like?
They're a part of the packet, and so they would be on this website, but I'll invite you to have a conversation with Mr. Cooper about that.
I can send you some drawings, yeah.
The city's website for the project will contain all the exhibits, and those exhibits include a rendering. Well, they include an elevation. They don't show we use these terms inartfully, me more than anyone. There are no elevations showing the look of the buildings that I recall. There are several renderings of the building locations, but I don't know of a look and feel diagram.
I do have access to a couple that they're not part of the staff report. I didn't think to include them. They're conceptual, but there are, which I will happily provide you, some artistic renderings of what.
Mr. Joyce, thank you for bringing that because I would like those. There are two things I would like from the city. One is those, since they're available. And the other is your proposed language in response to this issue of timing of mitigation. So if you could suggest to me how you might recommend modifying your proposed condition 2 as you testified to, I would like to see that. I'm not going to render a decision today. I want to see that. I want a lot of terrific information that I'm going to have to collect and digest, but I will render my recommendation to the council within a very short time. Mr. Carlson?
Yes, Mr. Examiner. We just wanted to make sure that you had enough information or clarification on our position regarding your procedural concern with the mitigation.
You have.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I get it. And so I'll await that, but if you can provide that promptly, that will
We'll get it to you today or tomorrow.
That would be great. I want to thank everyone for an articulate, thoughtful, civil discourse on these issues, and the quality of that has been top shelf. It has greatly enhanced the materials I have to think about. And so I will attempt to reciprocate by an articulate response, and I'll do that as soon as I can, again, within just a few days as is required of me by city ordinance. So I'll get underway, and I want to thank you. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks.